Hello, everybody. Is it Thursday?
Yes.
Happy Thursday of the 92nd month of 2020. Here we go. So we have a next little chunk here. And it's so funny, Leighton. We always kind of like, when we present together, we kind of talk about what we're going to do, but we don't really talk about what we're going to do. And every time I'm like, he always says the perfect thing for me to like follow up on. So it's so good. Okay, so here we go. So I'm talking to you today about my favorite thing to talk about in the whole world, which is curriculum design. If I had known that curriculum design could be a passion area, like who knows where my career would have went. But it actually has worked out really well because historically, as we know, we have our special education people over here and our curriculum people over here and our assessment people over here. And so part of this inclusive conversation is we need to bring these three lenses together to make this work. And so I'm so excited to show you what I've been learning about. But before we start, just again, I'm going to post the slides for my section on my website. I'll also be giving them to Tammy to be included in the video so that you can get them from multiple places. But I'll also refer to some resources that you will have access to, especially on the blog somewhere. So take note of that. I also want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Bowen Island, otherwise known as Nechwalakam. And my new Bowen Island fact of the week, because I'm trying to learn all about this place because I love it, is that Bowen Island is part of the Island Trust. Now, I didn't know this, but the Island Trust is 350 islands all through Salish Sea, Howe Sound. It's just so cool. Like BC, I'm from Alberta. There's no islands there. And now I'm like part of an Island Trust. Like I feel like I'm like, I love it. Okay. So Island Trust, unanimous commitment to reconciliation. And so there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in my place and the place of others. And I'm just so honored to be part of that process to engage and develop relationships with our with Indigenous populations and lands and communities around in grounds where I live. And I'm just so thankful for this place. So next time I'll come up with a new Bowen Island fact for you.
So come up with a Bowen Island fact. I said I can come up with a Bowen Island fact.
Tell me.
Ride your bike around it because it's full of mountains.
Well, and there's no loop. It's just like it's like an artery with veins. I'm like, come on, I need a loop. I don't like going somewhere and then having to go back. I want to like have a loop. I feel like I'm backtracking. So like that's why I love the seawall. Okay. Here we go. So this is what we're talking about today. I am going to show you two strategies. First one we're going to talk about is backwards design. And the second chunk, we're going to talk about my favorite strategy, which is the planning pyramid, which could also be considered a learning continuum. And these two curricular design strategies, I love them because they make curriculum inclusive. They make it accessible. They make it so that we can teach to a range of learners, whether they have different abilities or experiences or they come from different places. It's completely open-ended. And I think I love it the most because if I had been, you know what, let me try that again. The only year that I was taught this way was when I had Leighton as a teacher. If I had had this type of opportunity to learn in every year of my career, I wouldn't have hated school. So I just think that there's such an opportunity to really change what we do and how we use curriculum because we are so fortunate. We do not exist in a standardized curricular province. We have so much space and flexibility to be responsive to our groups and our learners and our communities. And so it's really just being like, hey, how do we do it? To show you visually what I mean, because I'm a visual learner, I'm going to show you what I was taught to do. Okay, so I'm secondary trained. I went to school at U of A in Alberta. And I'm going to show you what I was taught. This is what I was taught to do. Okay, ready? Here we go. I was taught, Shelly, go get the curriculum for what you're teaching. So, I mean, I could have taught home ec. I didn't. But if I I would go get the home ec curriculum. I did teach Math 8. So I would go and get the Math 8 curriculum. I also taught special education. So I got all the functional skills curriculum. And I made a plan for students who should be ready for those students. No problem. And then the students actually show up and you're like, I need an EA. They don't fit into my plan. And that would, I'm freaking out my dog. And then I'm like, that would be so nice, except that's not all. Then they just keep on coming. And I'm like, I need 4 EAs. They don't fit into my plan. I have to do all this extra work. But then it's just like, no one's going to get 4 EAs. No one's barely even going to get 1 or 2 EAs. So then we group them together and send them away. No problem. This is so much work. This is so much work. Because look, and we talked about the metaphor of the airplane last time, right? Like this idea of, okay. So I am designing an airplane for my pilots. So I'm making one airplane, and now I have all these pilots that don't fit into the plane. So now I have to design these individual education planes for all of these other students. Now I have to design 5 planes. This is so much work for a teacher. And this is the reason why we think inclusion is like a higher workload or a burden of workload. But because we were taught to do this from a retrofit model, which is the assumption is that everyone is the same and that we have a standardized curriculum. And if kids come into our class that don't fit, we adapt and modify after. It is the least effective and efficient process out there. I can't even believe we were taught. So what I'm advocating for and what Lane's advocating for and what all these middle school people are advocating for is, okay, we may have to make an assumption. But the assumption is not that kids are A, the same, or B, all where they should be. We have to assume that our little pilots are going to be diverse. We just have, like, I mean, this is life, right? Our classrooms are so diverse. We have to assume from the start that kids are going to come to us with different experiences, with different backgrounds, with different ability levels. But that doesn't have to be, like, that can be something we celebrate, not something we fear. That can be something we build on, not something that's a burden. It's only a burden if the goal is to make them all the same. But they don't have to be the same because we don't live in a standardized curriculum. Now, I am still using my grade level curriculum. This is part of the high expectations that I have for all of my learners. But it's understanding that because we don't have a standardized curriculum, our curriculum isn't green. We don't have to make everyone green. The goal of our curriculum is to help kids find their place within it. We are still drawing on grade level curriculum. If I'm teaching Math 8, I am drawing from Math 8 curriculum, but I am making that curriculum accessible and challenging and meaningful and representative of my group of kids. And how we do that, though, is that we can't do this after the fact. We can't retrofit, adapt, and modify after, because how we know to do those things is we have to wait for kids to fail. This all relies on a design principle that we do before we teach and is based on representation and anticipation of who our kids are and what they need ahead of time. That adjustment, that design, it is the most underutilized support in education, in medicine, in architecture. You don't need me to tell you that it is way more effective and efficient to add and design accessibility features into a building ahead of time than it is to design a non-accessible building and then try and retrofit it after the fact, right? This is about helping kids find their place, but it's the difference between having a standardized curriculum and a standards-based curriculum. We're still drawing from curriculum. We're not throwing curriculum out the door. Just like Leighton says, we have to learn about something, right? But our curriculum, we are so lucky. We are so lucky because we are not burdened with the where kids should be. Our questions are, where are they and where could they be? It's a could curriculum, not a should curriculum. But we can say that all day. I wasn't taught how to do this. I'm like, yeah, let's all design rainbow planes of love. I don't know how to do that. I wasn't taught how to do that. And so a lot of the work that I've been trying to work with schools and understand all of these things is like, okay, how do I do this? How do we design this way so that we are making one plan for a group of diverse learners instead of trying to fit one group of learners who are diverse into one standardized plan? And this accessibility and this challenging and this adjustability is what we're trying to do. So how do we do this? First thing, let's talk about airplanes first. Okay, so if we're going to design adjustable airplanes, right, let's talk about this. First, we need to know who our pilots are. We need to know the range of their dimensions. That word dimension is really important because when I say the word dimension to you, I think physical dimensions, like how tall are you? When someone asks me how tall I am, I never tell them what I'm not. I'm just like, I'm 5'8". There's nothing I can do about that. But in education, we often look for what can't they do? That's the equivalent of just being like, my answer being like, well, I'm not 6 feet. There's nothing I can do about that. Looking at student dimensions is akin to looking at student diversity. These are things that kids bring to the community. It's not things that we're going to change about them. It's things that we need to learn about them. And so if we're thinking about, well, how tall are they? We can't change their height, just like we can't change their experience and their history. We can't change their culture. We can't change their language. Like, we have to honor those things, because that's like trying to make them 6 feet when they're not. Like, the word dimension is just so important, okay? So we need to know who our kids are. We also need to know where our curriculum is, right? And this kind of is like, okay, well, what kind of plane are we flying? Are we flying a cargo plane? Are we flying a passenger plane, a fighter plane? Like, that's going to affect how we design it. We are not throwing curriculum out the door and riding bicycles. No, we still have an airplane. Like, we're still pilots, okay? The third one, though, is what I'm really learning about, and that is, how do we make this plane adjustable to this group of pilots? And we're kind of, you know what, I'm going to put that in my pocket, okay? But the fourth one is the most important one. If you imagine a pilot going into a plane, who makes the adjustments? Type it in the box. Who makes the adjustments? The pilot. The pilot makes the adjustments, okay? Now let's talk about curriculum. Here we go. Ready? When we talk about the curriculum, it's the same big ideas. Number one, we need to know who our learners are. And that word, think of that word dimension like their diversity. We need to learn what their diversity is. We need to help them understand their identity and who they are. But we're not changing these things. We're not telling them who they are. We're not finding out what they can't do. We're learning about who they are. What's their dimensions? The second one, which is one we're going to focus on today, is, okay, well, what's the curriculum? The grade level curriculum, or the grade level band of curriculum that we're using. We are not using grade 2 math and grade 10. No, we are using grade 10 math and grade 10, but we're making that curriculum accessible, okay? This is probably the biggest misunderstanding. Oh, kids aren't ready for grade 8 math. Let's put them in a bridge grade 8 math program that looks like grade 4 curriculum instead. But then they're missing grade 8 curriculum, and that's actually giving them another barrier to overcome, because they're missing curriculum that they need to have access to, which then puts them at an equity. It's actually putting an equity barrier in the way, right? That is not having high expectations. So grade level curriculum, period. But because we're not standardized, now we can actually say, how do I take this curriculum and make it responsive to my students, okay? Now we're in charge of designing some things, but if I think historically, ready? Who usually makes adjustments to the curriculum for students? Put it in the box. Who does it? Who makes the adjustments? Teachers! Teachers make the adjustments. Friends, no. This is the student agency piece that is so important. We have to show kids what adjustments there are, but we have to provide the space for them to be empowered and for them to have agency so that they can make the adjustments that make sense for them to fit into the plane. So when I think about this, I think, okay, there are 3 adjustments that kids need to make. They need to know the goals and the complexity of the goals that they're meeting. They need to know the strategies and supports and what strategies and supports they need to meet the goals. They also need to know what evidence, what their best evidence is that shows that they have met the goals. So we need to show them the options. We need to show them what options are available for goals. We need to show them what options are available for supports and strategies. We need to show them what options are available for evidence, right? It's very close to it's like what Leighton just showed you, right? Here are some options. You choose what you need to be able to meet this goal. The goal is the same for everybody. So the very first, let me see the time. Oh, great. So the very, very first strategy that we're going to talk about, and it's going to leak over into the next one, is backwards design. Okay. Now, backwards design, oh man, I totally misunderstood it. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and then I'm going to put you into breakout groups. So when I was school-based, I was at a high school, as you know, and I was working with students with intellectual disabilities. And so they were in their classes. And so whenever I had a student in a class, I would work with the teacher to plan with them so that that class was meaningful for the student. And one of my teachers, you guys will know her. I love her. And I have permission to tell this story. Linda Watson, love her. She was teaching grade 9 social studies, and I had a student in her class. And so we loved planning together. We'd get together every month and talk about the units and how to make them accessible. And so then I'm meeting with her and we're sitting there. I'm like, okay, Linda, what's your next unit? And I'm writing on the board. She's like, oh, the next unit, it's Napoleon. I'm like, cool. So then I'm thinking, I'm like, plan with the end in mind. Okay, so why are we learning about Napoleon? Like, what are the like, what's the kind of big idea here? And she's like, well, it's chapter 4. And we kind of look at each other and we're like, that's not really a reason, is it? So then we're like, what is the reason? Why are we learning about Napoleon? And we kind of just were like, not really sure. So then we're like, well, let's go look in the curriculum. Curriculum will tell us. And this is the previous curriculum even, okay? So we are looking through the curriculum. The word Napoleon's not there. And then we're like, why are we teaching Napoleon if Napoleon's not in the curriculum? And then I'm like, Linda, if Napoleon's not in the curriculum, what else isn't in the curriculum? And shocking, because if I were to say the 4 most important things about education based on my own experience, it would be like Napoleon, The Outsiders, Changing for Phys Ed, and Being on Time. And none of those things were in the curriculum. Nowhere. And I'm like, why do we do these things? And then we realized something. Because I even asked her, I'm like, you read The Outsiders, don't you? She's like, yeah, there's enough of them in the book room. And I'm like, what are we doing? We both were like, we had this moment, we're just like, what, this doesn't fit. And so we realized that we thought we were doing backwards design, but we weren't doing backwards design. We were doing this. We were doing something that's very dangerous. We were doing what we were doing because that's what has always been done. And that, my friends, is the most dangerous phrase in language. We do what we do because that's what's been done, not because it's good for kids, but because that's what was before us, because that's why we think and all of these things. And we realized that what we were doing and what had been done is that we were teaching to activities. We weren't teaching to goals. We didn't know the goals. And so we're like, okay, well, why are we, now we're like going wild in our minds. So we go to the next best source. Nope. Go to Google. I'm looking at the chat box. So I'm like, Google, why is it important to learn about Napoleon? And we looked at, there was all of these reasons. And I'm like, Linda, there's some really good reasons here. And we look and she's like, oh my goodness, look at that. So we're like, there are so many reasons to learn about Napoleon. Just like there's some really great reasons to learn about The Outsiders and Shakespeare. I still don't know about the Changing for Phys Ed, but whatever. But then I'm thinking to myself, and you know what one of the reasons was? Okay, listen to this. Napoleon did something different than any other leaders of his time. What Napoleon did is that he self-crowned himself. He self-declared himself a hero. Okay, so we learn about him to develop our critical thinking of history, of like history and like what makes a good leader, the historical critical thinking. And Linda's like, that's a goal. That is a goal in our curriculum. And we started cheering and clapping hands. And we realized this is what we were doing wrong, because you realize that it's the goal that we're teaching and evaluating, not Napoleon. Because then you realize, like, if Napoleon's not accessible, then you realize if you teach the goal, we could have so many more options that are like more accessible. Like, I don't know, someone whose name rhymes with Donald Trump, or we could talk about Malala, or we could talk about Lance Armstrong, or we actually did one where we could pick a local leader in our community. Like, we had all of these other options. We still taught Napoleon. It was a nod to the textbook, as Leighton says, but we also pulled in a whole bunch of leaders, because the goal isn't Napoleon. The goal was, let's look at all of these leaders and develop some criteria around what makes a good leader, what makes a hero. You know, who determines what a hero is? Can you call yourself a hero, or do other people have to call you a hero? Like, what are we doing this for? We're developing our critical thinking skills. And then we realized this, that we weren't doing backwards design. We were doing the opposite. We were doing forwards design. And this is how I was taught in school. This is how I was taught to teach. Forwards design is everybody gets the same activity. Everyone learns about Napoleon. Everyone has to write an essay. Everyone has to take a test. Everyone has to build a diorama. If kids can't do the activity, then we were taught, then you need to modify or adapt the goal. Well, if you can't do this, then you can do this instead. And we simplify the activity. And as a result, we simplify the goal, which is so inequitable, because if the activity is the barrier, we don't actually know if kids can meet the goal. Backwards design is the opposite. Backwards design, everyone has the same goal. And then we differentiate activities. So the goal is everyone will be a historical critical thinker. We're going to learn about Napoleon. We're going to learn about Malala and Lance Armstrong and Donnie and all of these people. And then we're going to look at all of our learning activities and be like, what are my best examples so that I can triangulate my evidence to show, to prove, to justify that I've met this goal. The students are doing that. Our job is to make sure that students know the goals and that we're providing opportunities for students to develop evidence in many, 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 many ways. And I always kind of think like the best design activities harnesses those three types of language: written language, oral language, visual language. But if we are only relying on essays or multiple choice tests to collect evidence, and that's the barrier, we'll never actually know if kids are meeting the goals or not, which is so, oh my goodness, it's like ethically criminal now that I think about it, right? And it affects me because that was my problem in school, right? I was only assessed on my Alberta provincial exams through short-term memory and written output, like the ones that I'm like, the most awful skills. And so I was almost recommended for an adapted English class. And if I had gone to that English class, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be doing my PhD with Leighton, like, right? Like it would have changed the trajectory of my life. And so backwards design, I've just learned, is such a huge model of equity. It incorporates choice, it incorporates agency, it helps hand over control for kids to be in charge of what counts as evidence. It's just so exciting. So I'm going to pause here because I want to give you guys a chance to like talk about this a little bit. And then when you come back for the next section, I'm going to walk you through an example of what this looks like. But here are your questions for your groups. Thinking about what we're talking about. What are you noticing? What are some things you're already doing? What are some questions that are coming up? What's something that might be useful to you? Because everything we're talking about, we want this to make your life easier. Something that's useful. We're going to go into breakup groups for 9 minutes. 9?
I think Leighton just cut you to 7
7
minutes.
it is.
Here we
7
go.
minutes, friends, and then we'll come back for the second chunk. Woo!
Here we go.